I'm going to start by just introducing myself and a little note about Lois, and then I'm going to introduce the panel. I will introduce you by name and title only, and then refer everybody back to your extensive bios that are on the website for the event, because I think, you know, this is not a lot of time. I would love to give you all individually as much time as you need to sort of tell your stories and make your remarks and interact with each other. I'm not going to have a ton of moderator questions, and maybe none. I was told by the organizers that we would prefer to allow the audience to interact with you. And so we have Jeff Grabelski is going to be on our panel, but he's going to be invisible for most of the conversation. And then he'll come on mic and on camera with questions from the audience. Okay, so we are trusting, I'll wait till his audio connects. Hey, Jeff, I was just telling everybody that you are going to be monitoring the Q&A for us. And then at a point when everyone's done their presentation, we'll invite Jeff onto mic and camera to ask a few questions from the audience with whatever remaining time we have. I had the order of presentation to be Cedric to kick us off, and then Nia, and then Bob. If you would like to rearrange that, that's totally fine with me. My big logic was that Cedric does this work about the intersections of race, labor, and politics. So I wanted him to just sort of set a theoretical world, and then have you all please give you like your absolute expertise on what we're doing in the labor movement at this moment. So that was kind of the idea. Do you have any questions for Christine, who's on tech, for Jeff, or for me?
I do not.
Great. I'm so happy that you've agreed to do this, and that we're all going to be able to share the space. Were you able to watch any of the plenary this morning?
A little bit of it. A lot was going on in my home this morning, so yeah.
Yeah. So it won't be kind of that format. Will be a little bit different. I don't know how much you Zoom. I feel like I Zoom all the time, but we're going to be in Zoom webinar format. So you won't see the audience. It will just be us. And you also will not see Christine or Jeff. It will just be me as the moderator. And then the three of you as panelists will be in boxes. And then there will be the green highlight around anybody who's talking. And Christine, if that's wrong, please let me know.
Oh, you've got it.
Okay, so I'll stay on camera with the three of you. I'm not going to interrupt your presentation. I am keeping an eye on the time. That 11:20 is a hard stop because they want us all to get back to the plenary and have everyone able to see. I think there's a video running after us. So, you know, if you're running a little long, I might do like a gentle hint. I think, Christine, can I also chat at the panelists directly without the audience seeing?
Yes, you can. When you go, you can choose,
okay,
you know, the chat box, whether, you know, who you would like to talk to.
Okay, so right now I have my chat
time
box
for you, and I'll keep time for you. So at 5 till and 2, then I'll remind you. I'll give you a chat.
Okay, great. And so if you see a little red notification go on for chat, that's probably us telling you that time is winding down. You've got 6 to 10 minutes. I wouldn't fret too much about the time. I think you'll do fine, but just keep an eye out for that chat box. You don't have to worry about anything else either. I mean, I'm going to encourage everyone to chat amongst themselves in the chat box, so that might get really congested. Just look for messages from us to the panelists.
And Tammy, I just want to check a couple of things before we go forward. But first, just a big good morning to you, Tammy. Thank you for doing the moderation. And Bob, it's always great to see you. Thank you. And Nia.
Thank you. My friend, hello.
Yeah, my friend, great. I hope Cedric will show up. I just want to
Cedric checked in earlier.
Okay, good. So there's two things I want to check. One, I'm just going to mute myself and and turn off my camera, which is what I'll be doing when you're presenting, until Tammy invites me back. And I just want to see what I see and what you see when we do that, okay?
Go ahead. So I was under the impression that we won't see Jeff's box.
That's what that's what I thought too. So I'm wondering, hold on, let me see.
At least that's what Pete said.
What I can do, I'm just looking here. It's a little bit different than a rename, spotlight, chat, mute.
Maybe it's because, have you made him a host or a co-host or a panelist?
I have not.
Well,
Okay.
his link probably connected him as a panelist, and as a panelist, he's probably going to be on the boxes.
Yeah, you're because we put you in as a panelist. Okay, let me,
I mean, I think I need him to have the ability to come on mic and camera later. So I don't want to take away his authority to do that.
so let me see when okay, here's Cedric. Let me see what happens when I stop my video. I'm still there.
Yeah, your photo's up. So Peter had said, or Pete, was it Peter?
Pete.
Had said that in webinar form that you all's boxes shouldn't be visible to the
Am I gone now?
No,
No.
you're still there. Let me suggest, Christine, if you can reach out to Pete just to ask about that.
I am.
And
Yeah.
if not, then you'll just see our names and that's fine. The other thing is I just want to confirm that if any one of you would just put something in the chat for a moment, because I want to offer as an option that Bob and Cedric and Nia, if there's a question that you want to ask, you want to be asked, like put it in the chat, I'll look for it. And I may add that to, if there's any dearth of questions coming from the audience that I'll be feeding, working with Tammy. But I can see that, Nia, I got your hello, so that works. Cool. All good, Tammy?
yeah, I guess I don't really understand your question or what you.
I was just checking
Because
that.
they're not going to be reading the Q&A. I mean,
Right.
they might, but they don't need, I wanted to free up their focus from having to watch for people's
Right.
questions. That's
No,
your role. Yeah.
Right. What I meant was I'm going to track the questions coming in from the audience, but I'll also track the chat among the panelists in case you want a question to be asked. I'll be looking at the chat as well.
Yeah, and for all of you, welcome back, Cedric. For all of you, because Jeff has sort of brought our attention to the chat, you can send a message to all panelists, or you can just send a message straight to Jeff. The only thing I just want you to feel like not over pressured, that you can't pay attention to sort of the conversation between the three of you because you're doing too many other things. So to the extent that you need to talk to Jeff, go ahead and do so, but don't feel obligated to be watching question and answers or anything. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Tammy.
And Nia, I would introduce you to Cedric De Leon.
It's Cedric.
Hi, Cedric. I'm Jeff.
Hi there, Jeff. Hi,
Oh,
Nia.
Jeff, you don't know Cedric as well. So
Yeah.
Cedric is the director of labor center at UMass Amherst.
That's great.
And Nia, general vice president. That's right, correct? At Unite here.
Nia, how are you?
I'm busy. Lots of things are going on.
I can imagine.
Yesterday was exciting
Yes.
in Georgia.
Can I say something real quick? Sorry, just a little technical. I just talked to Pete. And so Jeff, you and I, when we stop our video and mute ourselves, they will be able to, like, you guys will be able to see us, but the attendees will not be able to see us.
Okay.
So that's how it works.
Okay, thank you, Christine.
Do you, it's 10:20.
So are you asking me if you should just start letting people in?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Yes, it's 10:20. So should I start letting people in?
Well, the video is still running at this moment.
Oh, okay. So, but we,
Yeah, you can open the room. As long as everybody's asked all their questions, everyone feels comfortable with what's going on? Okay, great. Yeah, so I think we're ready to go. If you want to go off camera till we start, that's fine.
Okay. See you guys later. Thank you.
I'm going to stay on camera.
Okay. I'm going to start the webinar then.
Chris, wait 1 second. Christine, are you going to give me a go? Or
well, it's 10, it starts at 10:20, so it's 10:21, so I should start the webinar.
Okay, let's go.
Okay, I'm going to go off.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a second while everybody enters the room. Okay, because that we only have an hour for the breakout, I'm going to get started while folks enter the room. I am Tammy Lee. I'm Cornell ILR 2016, and now an assistant professor at Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations. I'm really, and my work focuses on critical race in industrial relations and also industrial relations in Cuba. I am really happy to have been asked to moderate the panel. I just want to start by saying something to Lois, her spirit, which is that Lois, you were more than an ally to me, you were an accomplice. And by that, I mean, I never would have finished my studies, my graduate studies in labor and employment without your support and understanding and belief that there were things happening that were creating unique struggles for women of color in the field. I feel less safe in this world without you here physically. I love you, and I really hope that I live up to the part of your legacy that includes me. So welcome everybody to the breakout session on a contested political terrain. From a critical race perspective, every moment that our most vulnerable working people are denied justice, and in every space in which that occurs, that is a contested political terrain to me. And I would argue that how we approach this theme and what contested political terrain means is itself a contested political terrain. And so I am really excited for you all to be in conversation with the three panelists that we have today. First, we have Cedric De Leon, who is the director of UMass Amherst Labor Center. He has expertise at the intersections of race, labor, and politics, which I think will come in very handy for this discussion. We also have Nia Winston, the General Vice President for Unite Here, and is going to share a lot of great storytelling about what's been going on the ground in terms of the 2020 elections and going forward. And we have Bob Master, the Legislative and Political Director of CWA in the Northeast, and can't wait to hear Bob's thoughts on the current labor politics and how we might be dealing with, in this moment, the legacies of white supremacy in at least one of our major political parties, right? Okay, so I am not going to take all of this time, and I would love to shift our focus to the panelists. To the audience, I really want to, first of all, recognize the expertise of those of you who are watching. And I want to encourage you to use the chat box to engage with each other during this conversation. If you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen and type your questions in there. We have our colleague, Jeff Grabelski from the Worker Institute, who will be curating questions from the Q&A box to ask to our panelists towards the end of the session. Okay, so without any further ado, I would love to invite Cedric to the front and take the mic, please, for your remarks.
Well, many thanks to you, Tammy, for thinking of me for the panel and for moderating, to Kim Cook for organizing us, my co-panelists for what I expect will be an important conversation, and to all of you for coming. The title of my talk is In Search of James Baldwin. In these troubling times, the challenges of which I need not enumerate, activists and scholars often make reference to Antonio Gramsci, the Italian intellectual and left revolutionary, who was imprisoned by none other than Benito Mussolini in the 1930s. Gramsci described the terrifying context of interwar Europe in this way, quote, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear," end quote. Some have taken liberties to translate that last phrase more ominously as, "Now is the time of monsters." Gramsci thus theorized the Great Depression and the ascendancy of Nazism as symptoms of a social order in transition, from an era of unregulated free market capitalism characterized by mass unemployment and labor repression, to one of socialism, characterized by working class power. Like other progressives, I love Gramsci's theory of the crisis of hegemony, but I have always been dissatisfied with it because it leaves little room for inequalities and social systems beyond class and capitalism. Imagine my surprise then when I discovered that James Baldwin had adapted Gramsci to the Black freedom struggle. In his autobiographical essay, No Name in the Street, published in 1972, Baldwin recalls a Black grocer in the Deep South who was a leader in the post-war voter registration drive and received bricks through the windows of his store for the trouble. Baldwin poignantly writes that the grocer had armed himself and his sons night after night, and that one morning, after one of these vigils, he decided that this was no way for anyone to live and set down his guns. That moment of decision between armed struggle and nonviolence was the one that Black folks still faced in 1972. Baldwin wrote, quote, "An old world is dying, and a new one announces that it is ready to be born. This birth will not be easy, and many of us are doomed to discover that we are exceedingly clumsy midwives. No matter, so long as we accept that our responsibility is to the newborn. The acceptance of responsibility contains the key to the necessarily evolving skill," end quote. Placing Gramsci and Baldwin in conversation with one another helps us address the overarching theme of this panel, which is contested political terrain. By way of preview, I will argue that this theme entails the what, who, and where of political struggle in this moment. But I will also suggest that Baldwin urges us to rethink our answers to these questions, given the centrality of white supremacy in American life and the mistakes we will make along the way. The term contested refers to the what, as in what are the competing political projects and what is to be done. Contested refers in this context to division or the lack of consensus in the labor movement on how to proceed amidst a crisis of hegemony, in which the people have withdrawn their consent to be ruled by the existing social order. There are those in the labor movement who are warm friends of the former Trump administration and see a path forward through social exclusion, in which the rapidly shrinking resources available to the working class under neoliberalism can and should be hoarded by white workers. Others are turned off by the brazen racism of that position and prefer a return to the good old days of the Obama administration, when times were rough, but at least everyone was recognized to have certain individual rights. Still others insist that the supposedly post-racial neoliberalism of the Obama administration was itself the problem, and that the labor movement must mobilize to usher in a new world order. The term political refers to the who of this crisis. The political philosopher and legal scholar Carl Schmitt argued that the political is fundamentally about the friend-enemy distinction. We must ask, in other words, who are our comrades and who are foes? Once again, there is a diversity of opinion on this question. For conservatives, the enemy is a composite of the deep state, unions, women, people of color, immigrants, queer folk, and all others who refuse to leave it to Beaver. For liberals, the enemy is the Republican Party, particularly their bigoted social conservatism. I would add that for liberals, workers and their unions are also the enemy, but they don't like to talk about that too much. Finally, for the DSA and the trade union left, the enemy is most certainly capitalism itself. By terrain, we ask where, as in where must we fight? Do we fight in the workplace? Do we fight in the arena of electoral politics? Do we fight in the trenches of civil society and go over the top to assault the state, as Gramsci would have it? Another way to frame the where question is, where do we invest our resources and time? Do we invest in union elections, congressional and presidential elections, or in mass mobilization on the ground? But if this is what contested political terrain means, broadly speaking, then what does Baldwin's particular translation of Gramsci suggest for the who, what, and where of the labor movement struggle? In terms of the who, I think it is safe to say that for Baldwin, the enemy was Jim Crow capitalism. Not capitalism alone, but buttressed and enabled by the relatively autonomous ideology and institutions of white supremacy. The enemy is therefore at least a two-headed beast. And were we to take that intervention to the contemporary moment, especially in light of Baldwin's queer identity, we might visualize a hydra of interlocking systems of oppression. Accordingly, the what, the alternative political project of the left, would necessarily be an intersectional approach to labor solidarity, one that envisions the struggle for economic justice as inseparable from the struggles for gender and racial equity. Certainly, the Black freedom struggle, of which Baldwin was a leading figure, never distinguished between economic and racial justice. Let us not forget that the March on Washington was actually called the March for Jobs and Freedom, for one was meaningless without the other. Finally, the where of this moment is not just out there in the streets or in the workplace or in the arena of electoral politics, but also in our own backyard, among us, and inside the labor movement. To rethink the who and the what of our struggle must entail a struggle amongst ourselves. Confining our work to any one of these outside arenas, or worse yet, engaging in the politics of exclusion, will lead us back to the same mistakes that have brought us to the current moment, where large percentages of our membership have become alienated from the movement and in some cases become crypto-fascists. Rethinking the what, who, and where of our struggle will be hard. We will get things wrong from time to time. We will be clumsy midwives if there is indeed such a one. And our skill will necessarily be evolving. But throughout it all, no matter the terrain, we must, as Baldwin asks of us, be mindful of our responsibility to the newborn world. That must be our ever-present touchstone as we negotiate this contested political terrain. Thank you.
Thank you, Cedric. That spoke to me in this moment, and I appreciate your words and setting the stage for us. You know, the what, who, where, and I would even add why, when the labor movement thinks about what our role is at this moment and what our role is in the political economy, should bring us new sort of notions of what solidarity means, what justice means, what equity means, and how that is distinguished from equality, given our traditional approaches to these things, which usually are racially neutral and class forward, and hide some of the things that Cedric is getting at when he brings Baldwin and Gramsci together. So I appreciate that, Cedric. I would love now to shift a little bit to Nia Winston, the General Vice President of Unite Here, to talk to us about how this was framed in the great work that she's been doing in the political arena with the labor movement. Nia, please take the stage.
Thank you, Tammy. I appreciate that. Thank you, Kim, and thank you, Jeff, for inviting me. Thank you to all my co-panelists and also the audience. I would just say that, that COVID-19 and the pandemic, for me, it's like what I call the great reveal, laying bare to the, injustices and inequalities in our country and white supremacy. And 98% of our hospitality workers last year this time were laid off, had no job due to the pandemic. And so this was extremely personal for us, what the current administration was doing and lack thereof. We did not decide to get into the political arena and decide to do politics on the ground in March of 2020. We were deciding this well before that, deciding that, we would continue our ground level and what we do, not just only in Nevada or not just only in Arizona, but going to states that we have never been to before, knowing what we had to do was real sincere, and just having a lot of the workers in our minds, in our hearts of what they were dealing with during this pandemic when they were not working. And so we decided to go to Florida, also to Arizona, and also to Philly, PA. We had not planned on doing that very early on in the election, but we knew that as seeing what was happening on the ground, it was very necessary and needed. And then the Georgia Senate runoff races, which I'll talk a little bit about, but I'll tell you how we got there. And so when we were thinking about how do we do this in a safe manner, because make no mistake about it, we can do as much political phone calls, emails, and texts, but there's nothing that replaced the face-to-face with the voter on the ground, having deep conversations with them about why there's a need for change and why we're knocking on their door and why we need them to get out and vote and what our story means and how it make a difference. And quite frankly, what our members were saying is that if we don't win this election can very well, in some degree, we had workers saying, this is life or death for myself and my family, whether or not, the systemic racism keeps going on in my neighborhoods, whether or not I live because I don't have access to affordable healthcare, whether or not that, I can't get a COVID-19 vaccine when it's available because it's not available in my area, and things of that nature. So our members were like, they were in the forefront, like, this is something that we need to do and necessary. But I want to talk about how we left the door open, quite frankly, and how we decide to canvas in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic. And quite frankly, what I like to say, how we blew the hinges off the door, having the largest field game in our union's history. We deployed over 1,700 hospitality workers to knock on doors, 4.6 million targeted doors and families. Many of these workers were workers of color. And also in some of the states, they were the decisive Biden's margin in Nevada, Arizona, and Florida. And so the work that we did in the Senate runoff races with Senator Warnock and Ossoff, our members still to this day, workers that were on the ground, they, now we know from that relief package, the work that they did and the work that they continue to do was necessary and it was just, and they just have this sense of pride about them, quite frankly, and others and allies changing our political climate. But I'll tell you how the work started. So during the height of the pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, March of last year, we were negotiating when these workplaces were closed. I'm talking hotels, casinos, stadiums, arenas, country clubs, tech places, food service industries. We were negotiating with the employer what it looks like for our members to return back to work safely, what it looks like for proper PPE, what it looks like for health and safety protocols. And quite frankly, we were just battling with billionaires. But during that time and working with epidemiologists and others, we found a way to make sure that when workers come back to work, that the necessary needs and tools they needed to do their job safely, where it was where it was either standing less than 6 feet away from a guest or wearing a mask all day and what that looks like and having to take constant breaks, et cetera, or just having, quite frankly, proper PPE. Because I don't think workers and employers knew early on what that was necessary and needed. But doing all of that work in March, April, and May, and getting to a place where we were able to negotiate, it was those same health and safety protocols and tools that we use with employers that we use for us to safely and effectively do what we did on the ground. And I think that if we were not able to do that and really get deep and dive into what workers needed when they returned back to work and how safe does a workplace need to be and what proper PPE, quite frankly, like I said, they gave us the groundwork to make sure that we were going to run a massive political operation. I will tell you, when I was a member in our union and I was not an officer of the union, one of my first campaigns that I worked on was a organizing campaign of a political campaign. Went to Vegas and was able to see what that looked like and just got intrigued about all the work that unions do, not just in my workplace at that time, but also in my neighborhoods and everything that it was necessary and common to my life and what I needed to do moving forward. So fast forward now, again, those workers, there was no substitute. We talked about it early on. These workers, we were fighting with their employers to continue healthcare coverage. So many of them, as they were knocking on those doors, they knew that, again, it was their livelihood at stake, that we had to change the political climate, elect a president that was going to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk, and to ensure that everything that we suffered for and everything that we lacked thereof in that former administration, that we did not have that moving forward, because that was something that we needed, again, not just for ourselves, but our families, but also for our loved ones. So I'll say many of the political work that we've done with the workers, this work continues on. It's not just in the workplace, it's not just on the field in those states. It's what we continue to do, it's what we continue to do when we lobby our Congress and our Senate to pass the bill. It's things that we do often all the time, but for our members now, like participating in the 2020 races, what we called our campaign Take Back 2020, and we damn sure took it back. All the things that we thought that did not happen, and at that time in the Trump administration, we took that back in 2020. We took it back for our co-workers, we took it back for our loved ones, and we were able to do that in a safe, effective manner, again, because of a lot of the work that we had done during the pandemic with working with employers to get our members back to work and safely and sound. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nia. That's fantastic. And I think we all watched as workers of color in particular in the labor movement really drove in 2020 in places where we weren't expected to win, not only victory, but conversation about why political participation by workers is essential and why the most essential of those workers should be at the front of that discussion, right? And so thank you so much for your work there. And I can't wait till we get back in conversation all together to talk about the legacies of that and also the precedents, or what came before that made that possible for workers of color to lead. I'd like to shift over to Bob Master. Bob, talk to us about the political moment in terms of what we think of as traditional political parties. And we keep talking, or we keep using this word reckoning. I think we all think there's a critical juncture. Some of us have been on a long ancestral struggle for this. Some of us, for some of us, it started at Trump. But so the traditional existing status quo political system, what does this mean, this moment of reckoning for the labor movement broadly? And how do you see this moment and the future of the role of the labor movement in this political project?
Thanks, Tammy. That great question. And I just want to acknowledge, well, first I want to thank Cornell and Tammy and Jeff for inviting me to participate in this great panel, and just acknowledge these terrific presentations by Nia, Unite Here's work was humbling, really, the incredible mobilization, especially given the state of your industry, was a inspiration to all of us in the labor movement. And Cedric, I didn't expect to start with Gramsci and Baldwin, but I'm very happy to try to situate my presentation within that, because in fact, as Tammy said, I want to spend a couple of minutes kind of outlining an analysis of how we got to this moment, trying to figure out what this moment is, which is hard to do given kind of the head-snapping changes that we've seen even in the last 2 months since Biden was inaugurated. But I think without that analysis, I think it's impossible for us to chart a strategic path forward for labor. So I think we need to try to begin as Cedric did, and I do really feel like we were on the same track here of trying to, what I'm trying to do is situated within his presentation. I think we need to understand the rise of Trumpism, right-wing populism, neo-fascism, whatever you want to call it, because if we, and I mean collectively here, we as labor, the left, and the Democratic Party, if we fail to succeed in this moment, the dangers of resurgent Trumpism, of neo-fascism, are extremely dangerous. Of course, given the time constraints of, for this panel, what I'm going to say is kind of very broad and schematic. It probably misses a lot of nuance, but let me give it a try. I think any analysis of the current moment has to begin with racism, which, if you're doing any analysis of American politics and American history, you have to start with racism. It is and has always been kind of the defining force, or one of the most important defining forces of the political terrain. And you can follow the kind of racist and xenophobic roots of Trump's politics almost as far back as you want in American history. But for the purposes of this discussion, I would focus on the beginning of the collapse of the New Deal coalition in the mid-1960s, when the Democratic Party turned towards civil rights, and George Wallace, who I think is probably the single best is probably not the right word, but the single antecedent for Trump in American politics, the difference being that Wallace was kind of a marginal figure in the late 1960s, Trump became president. A time when Wallace and Goldwater began to organize and capitalize on the racist backlash of elements of the white working class, initially in the South, but as Wallace demonstrated as early as the primaries of 1964 in Michigan and Wisconsin among white ethnics in the North as well. And the Republican Party has been manipulating this strain of racial resentment and the protection of white power ever since, and using it to obscure the working class content, the anti-working class content of their economic program. We saw it with Nixon and the silent majority and Law and Order. We saw it when Reagan launched his campaign in 1980 outside of Philadelphia, Mississippi, his denunciation of Cadillac driving welfare queens. We saw it in the Willie Horton ads, in the anti-Obama birtherism, and on and on. And all through those decades, the Republicans hid behind racism, law and order, homophobia, anti-choice to push the program of the Chamber of Commerce. And way too many white working class voters, including, sadly, an increasing number of our own members, bought that. What Trump did so brilliantly was to recognize that this right-wing populist base didn't actually buy a lot of the Chamber of Commerce program, in particular free trade, but also cuts to entitlements. And he pushed a more genuinely populist version of right-wing populism. And of course, he completely amped up the explicitly racist and xenophobic elements of his appeal. No more dog whistles. This was more like a blaring, screaming brass band of racism. He tapped into the racism and insecurity of his base, their anger and frustration, and he fanned it and channeled it into anger against the other. And it worked. But I think we have to be cognizant that another long-term political development facilitated this appeal, and that was the neoliberal ascendancy in the Democratic Party. The Carter, Clinton, Obama turn away from forthright New Deal progressive politics that aimed to raise the living standards of all working people, essentially left the Democrats without a compelling alternative appeal to overcome working class anger and resentment. For sure, such a program would not have succeeded with all of those in the racism and resentment camp, maybe not even with most, but maybe with some. So the commitment to free trade, to ending welfare as we know it, grand bargains about reining in entitlements, bailing out banks, deregulating finance, job retraining instead of preservation of manufacturing jobs, meant that Democrats in power had very little to offer working people of all races. And it explains the appeal of Trumpism to so many white working class voters, but also, I think, explains the bleeding of some black and brown votes, especially among men, that we saw in the most recent election results. So, fundamentally, the problem is that with the partial and contradictory success of Obamacare, Democrats haven't really governed in a way that improved regular people's lives since Medicare, which is, by the way, exactly when the New Deal coalition began to disintegrate. This intersection of racism, resentment, and the ascendancy of neoliberalism in the Democratic Party combined to open the door to Trumpism. Now, there's a third development, and Cedric made reference to this as well, the fate of which is being played out in front of us right now. That is the rise of left-wing populism, socialism, anti-corporate, in some cases, anti-capitalist politics inside the Democratic Party. Occupy Wall Street, 2 Bernie campaigns, a Warren campaign, Black Lives Matter, the Dreamers, the Sunrise Movement, AOC, Justice Democrats, the Working Families Party, the Fight for 15. These movements over the last 10 years have had a decisive impact on moving the center of gravity in the Democratic Party in a progressive direction. And that brings us to the current moment and what are the obligations of trade unionists. I firmly believe that the key task for Democrats under Biden is to govern in a way that actually makes people's lives unequivocally better in terms of income, childcare, education, healthcare, paid family leave, voting rights, union rights. And amazingly, it appears that Joe Biden and Ron Klain and Janet Yellen and Cecilia Rouse and other people in the administration kind of got the same message. Remarkably, we are seeing in this first stimulus package and in discussion about infrastructure and green jobs and the discussion about voting rights, a forthright acknowledgement that Democrats do, in fact, have to make people's lives better. And if the Republicans stand in the way, we should run right over them. Frankly, it's not what I expected. It's not the Joe Biden that I would have predicted would have behaved this way. I was optimistic that he could be forced in this direction, but I didn't see necessarily such strength and forthrightness coming right from the beginning. So where does that leave us as the labor movement? The first thing we should acknowledge is that with the major exception of the Fight for 15 and partly the fight against the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which my union was very involved in, most of the heavy lifting in moving the Democratic Party to the left was done by non-labor forces. Some unions endorsed Bernie, including mine in 2016, but most of that movement energy that has shifted the Democratic Party to the left came from grassroots non-labor sources. Second, Biden may be going down the right path now, but inevitably there will need to be outside pressure, whether it's on the size and greenness of the infrastructure package, on the need to ditch the filibuster, on voting rights, most of all on union rights and the PRO Act. We need to educate our members and be prepared across the country to mobilize to press for a pro-labor agenda. Finally, we need to take on the question of racism, racist division, scapegoating, and white supremacy explicitly with our members. We need to educate our members about how racism and xenophobia defied and cost all of us. We are trying to do this with our political education programs inside the union, and we believe this is something that should be a priority movement-wide. Heather McGhee, the former president of Demos, has made a great contribution to this discussion with her new book, The Sum of Us, which takes on what she calls drained pool politics, referring to the way that segregationists drained pools in the South to keep blacks out, and then nobody had a place to go swimming. So in conclusion, I think we may be embarked at this moment on a remarkable, perhaps somewhat unexpected moment, a movement that is as full of possibility as the 1930s or the 1960s. Crises like the pandemic create opportunities, and they sometimes transform our leaders, as the Civil War did to Lincoln and the Depression did to Roosevelt. What is missing in comparison with those eras is the mass pressure, the outside agitation, in the case of Lincoln, actual warfare that forced these leaders to rise to the moment and transform the country. I'm not advocating for war, but I am advocating for the labor movement to organize itself, to push, to make this moment as expansive and transformational as possible. And that requires us to educate our members and get in the streets and to capitalize on this moment and achieve as much as we can for working people.
Thank you, Bob, for bringing us all the way back in. This is an amazing panel. Let me just tell you, because these are three distinct presentations, but let me try to think of some themes in which I would love you all to interact with each other, right? Some common themes that I saw. And Jeff, I know you're lurking in the back. To the extent that there are questions or you want to join the panel and come on mic and join the conversation, I invite you to do so. So one of the things that seems to be a common thread through all three of your presentations is about the role of the labor movement at this particular critical juncture in the political economy. And what that means in terms of what even is a labor movement at this moment, right? Who's in the labor movement? And so I feel some innovation and some change and some new coalitions that exist because the labor movement doesn't seem or cannot continue to only stand for economic justice without understanding how economic justice is tied inherently to social identity-based justice, right? Gender justice, racial justice, disability justice, right? So what is the labor movement right now? And what's that relationship to traditional unions is maybe one thing you all can talk to from your different lenses. Also, everyone talked about building an intersectional labor movement. And Bob identified education and sort of the union having to take a role in educating in order to build that intersectional movement. How do you do that when we all know, right, that we have long existed in the labor movement with a normalization of the hierarchies within the working class, that there's always been privileged members within the working class and the labor movement, and then those folks who have been left for what I have referred to before as trickle-down social justice within the labor movement. So I just want to put those two things out there and invite anybody for comment or discussion. You included, Jeff.
You know, Bob, a few things you said to me kind of fired me up and intrigued me. And I'll say what, I often talk about that the labor movement can offer now in these times a new birth of a just America. And I say that because as we were rising in the streets for Black Lives Matter, I don't often think sometimes labor movements, I didn't see labor out there first to begin with. I didn't see labor in the street. Now, there may be some labor members within their,
Right.
themselves.
Depending on how we define labor, right?
Right. But, and sometimes I think that this is an opportunity for us to do better because we can not only focus on what goes on in our members' workplace, we got to give a damn about what goes on in their lives and their neighborhoods and what they are facing. And, we are the ones that are extremely organized when it comes to, but sometimes that can be to our demise because sometimes we think we're too organized and, we have to include allies. We have to include like-minded thinking organizations to do it in a collective way. And that was one of the things that we did in Georgia. We didn't go in Georgia and say, we're united here, we know what we're doing. We asked for permission. We worked with allies to do that. And also to Jeff's point, we educated and trained our member in racial trainings. So those canvassers, we talked to them and we showed them videos of what the South, what Georgia was like and how we got there and all the, the antics that were going on. And a lot of them were surprised, like, wait, I didn't know that. But to his point, we have to educate and we have to talk about things that not only happen on the jobs, but we have to talk about systemic racism and we have to talk about what goes on our members' lives and in their neighborhoods.
Cedric, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to those themes, Tammy. I mean, I think, you know, there's no real secret about who or what the labor movement is at this point, right? I mean, if you just look at union density, right, at the public sector and the private sector, right, 35% of the public sector is union, 6% of the private sector is union. And who's in the public sector, right? These are primarily women and people of color, right? And that has been going on since really the 1960s, right? When the labor movement and the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement articulated together at that crisis. But of course, that's not reflected in the leadership or the staff of the labor movement, with few exceptions to the rule, right? And so the question then becomes, as your second theme suggests, right? Like, how then do we create a labor movement that, or rather a labor leadership and officialdom that actually reflects the rank and file diversity and militance of the members themselves? And, for me, this goes back to what Bob was saying with respect to political education. And the only, I'll just say concretely what we do at the UMass Amherst Labor Center. We deliberately, right, intentionally recruit progressive people of color and allies who want to do this work, this transformative work within the labor movement. We educate them, and then we place them, and then we infiltrate the rest of the labor movement so that they have folks, who have all of the skills, right? Collective bargaining, labor law, and so forth, that one needs to do the different jobs in the labor movement, but who also have like a politics, right? That understands that, the only way forward for us is to build a mass movement, to build that mass pressure by uniting, these different sentiments on the ground from different marginalized communities. Nia was talking about the folks who were so hard hit by the pandemic. Who are those folks? Primarily communities of color, working class communities of color. That's what the movement needs to become. And I think the only way forward is to do that kind of political education, and to place people, to infiltrate the labor movement with folks who have that same outlook, who have those values. If we don't do that, the labor movement is going to remain exactly the same as it is.
Yeah, I think that's true. Nia and Cedric talking about those class of workers that are predominantly Black and brown and immigrant, who, to tie in what Bob was saying about the New Deal, I mean, those folks were excluded by the New Deal era too. It wasn't a New Deal for everyone. We didn't all benefit the same. And so some of those folks are still outside of the statutory definition of, right, employees for the labor movement. So Bob, I don't know if you want to join in on this sort of conversation about how we're going to tackle this. And then after Bob, Jeff, if we have time left, it looks like there's some folks in the chat with questions and in the Q&A. So Bob, please.
I'd say two things. One is the questions that you raised are really, really hard questions, because the labor movement can very easily slip into a mode of kind of simple collective bargaining and simply trying to work on behalf of its existing membership and not thinking more broadly. And we need to do that, because those are the people who pay our dues, and we can't pretend that we can avoid that. On the other hand, there's two other things I would say. One is there's always been a left and a right in the labor movement. Going back 100 or 120 or 130 years, there's always been people who want to focus narrowly on defending the interests of the members who are, in the strongest position already, or thinking more expansively. I mean, obviously the most dramatic break in that was the development of the CIO, right? And notwithstanding the racist limitations of the New Deal, the CIO was very explicit in saying, we are organizing every worker, regardless of race, in that factory. It didn't eliminate the hierarchies that sometimes existed in the job structure. But it was a breakthrough. I mean, as late as 1945, 17 AFL-CIO, AFL unions still had whites-only membership clauses in their constitutions, right? So we need a more defined left in the labor movement. And I listened to Mary Kay earlier, and she is articulating a progressive perspective. And we need to organize around that broader perspective. She is talking about the need to create new bargaining structures for people who don't work in conventional workplaces, sectoral bargaining. So I think we need to have a more explicit commitment. And if you think about the left in the labor movement, especially the left-led unions in the 30s, they were much, much more explicitly involved, the UE, the food and tobacco workers, et cetera, fighting racism directly. It was one of the central differences between the CP-led unions and the mainstream of the labor movement. The third thing I'd say, and I'd stop here, is this is a crisis on the scale. We're living through a crisis on the scale of the Depression. And Biden's response is reminiscent of Roosevelt's response. Roosevelt went beyond what people expected him to do. And to respond to, there's a question in the chat from Joseph about, structural changes. I mean, if we get rid of the filibuster, if we pass sweeping voting rights legislation, if we pass the PRO Act, these things will actually change the rules of the game. And shame on us if we as the labor movement don't organize to seize this opportunity.
Thanks, Bob. I had all kinds of thoughts while you were talking about the left and right in the labor movement, and I would love to talk to you for hours about what that actually means, right? So it sort of seems like on that typology, the right is people who are privileged enough to only be concerned with economic justice, and then on the left is people who want actual just basic human rights and equity, right? And that the idea that that's the frame is very problematic, right? And that's the frame for the status quo. And historically, that's, I think, a unique challenge to the union movement, who's always claimed to stand for justice for all, right? So has always claimed and still claims to be on the left of that, right? Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking because this isn't about me. There are folks who have really interesting questions, and I think challenging questions in the Q&A and in the chat. So let me invite the brother Jeff Grabowski onto the stage to bring your questions forward. Jeff, please.
Great, thanks, Tammy, and thank you, panelists, for both wonderful opening comments and the conversation that you're having now. I want to encourage participants to put their questions in the Q&A as opposed to the chat to make sure that we don't lose any of your questions. And I just want to raise a question that captures a theme that has emerged in several of the questions that have been raised. Bob just talked about this being a moment of crisis that also presents some unique opportunities, and expressed both his surprise and delight at like the way the Biden administration appears to be responding to this moment. A question for the panelists is, if this is a moment of potential breakthrough, then can you suggest some breakthrough strategies in the political arena that labor could embrace at this time? Some of the questions that came up are, is this a time for a labor party? Is there a way to go beyond the electoral politics that doesn't fundamentally challenge the structure of our political system? And what other opportunities are there with more novel breakthrough political strategies at this moment? Trying to capture some of the themes of a variety of questions there. Bob, you look like you're.
Well, this is the age-old question, right? And part of that dialogue between the left and the right and the labor movement for all those century and a quarter, whatever it is, has been about independent politics. Count me as a skeptic for actual third parties based on my study of history, because of the structure of the American political system, right? And the first past the post, single member districts, non-parliamentary legislative formations, et cetera. Having said that, for the last 20 years, I've been involved in building the Working Families Party, which is a form of third-party politics that enables us to kind of articulate an independent perspective, to engage in primaries, and to try to challenge the Democratic Party to move to the left. And under the leadership of Maurice Mitchell, I have great hope for the party growing nationally in the future. For me, I mean, I think, you know, the kind of work that Nia and Unite Here did, where you're really mobilizing members on an independent program to communicate with, you know, with the general public, is really kind of a model of more of the kind of stuff that we need to do. And I do think the key is, to what extent can labor define itself as having an independent perspective from the Democratic Party and be willing to push very hard on elected officials to deliver on what they promised. And I think one of our, and I'll try to stop here, but one of the great failures of our movement was in 2009, when we did not mount an outside game to pressure Barack Obama. We were so smitten, I think, with the transformational nature of the election of the first Black president, that we really didn't organize in the streets. And we cannot make that mistake again. I think we have a better understanding that we missed a huge opportunity in 2009. We've got to be in the streets to the extent that we can be, pandemic limitations, et cetera, and trying to put pressure on the Democrats to deliver.
I have a follow-up, but I just wanted to see first if Nia or Cedric wanted to jump on that.
Cedric was gonna weigh in. Go ahead, Cedric.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I think, you know, Joseph is right that, like, you know, for the most part, the mainstream labor movement plays traditional interest group politics. So what would be different? What would be a breakthrough strategy? I think that a breakthrough strategy would basically to concentrate our efforts on mass mobilization from below. By that, I do not mean don't get involved in electoral politics. And there's a way to get in electoral politics by mobilizing, you know, the membership in these important grassroots ways, as Nia has shown, right? But I think that is the key. The more money that we put towards traditional interest group politics, the less money we have to do things like political education and build the kind of mass pressure from below that is going to keep, you know, the political establishment accountable to the labor movement. With respect to third parties, I feel like, you know, the history of American politics is littered with the carcasses of independent labor, socialist, and communist third parties, and you know, and though, you know, and so I think we need to focus our efforts on rebuilding power from below, and you know, I don't think there's any substitute for that. The political establishment will respond when we have that kind of power.
Jeff, can I just add just a very small thing? And I know you have a follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
This is sort of just to add on to what Cedric's saying. Irrespective of political parties in the US neoliberal capitalist experience, what I see is a tremendous opportunity, if not the only opportunity of the moment, that seems innovative to me, is that if the labor movement is actually committed, and I'm looking at Nia and what she talked about, she did in 2020, if we're actually committed to listening to the movements that are led by people of color from below, you will hear in their approach to what is the problem and what is the solution, things that are outside of the status quo political parties, right? Black feminisms that are rooted in abolition theory. Black liberation movement has long had space for something outside of the two political parties that have long existed in the United States, right? There are conversations around anti-capitalism, right? Or solutions that are outside of capitalism or some sort of imagined fair capitalism that somehow can be separated from white supremacy and patriarchy, right? So those things have existed and have been a long struggle for the very class of people who are at the bottom of the working class right now within the labor movement and outside of the labor movement. So we really just need to actively listen. This is our moment. Will we do that? Or will we keep imposing on the working people what we think is the best strategy for what they should do, right? Or to say it more bluntly, are we going to keep a plantation mentality where we say we know what's best for the people who are doing movements from the grassroots than they do about what they need to be liberated from?
And just say, Tammy, you are absolutely correct. My sister, when I tell you, it's not hard for Unite here. And I'm not saying that we do everything right and we get it right, right? I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying, it's not hard for us to do just that because our members and our union was founded of women and people of color. So, you know, when we listen to those leaders and those workers, you know, I'm thankful to our international president, Dee Taylor. You know, the fact that we are putting a racial justice lens on all the work that we do. And so, and, you know, and to your point and what others said earlier, allowing folks to lead in a space where you have, you know, members that are, or leaders that are reflective of the membership. You know, I represent in my area, the Midwest, but predominantly in my local, which is in Michigan, Ohio, it is predominantly African-American women. And so, you know, formerly Caucasian male, but it was because of Dee Taylor and John Wilhelm and all that came before him that says, look, our leadership has to be reflective of our membership, and letting those leaders lead because they're eager to lead, right? We just have to give them space and the opportunity to do such. You listen to them. Absolutely. And thank you very much, Tammy. That is important, and protection. But once you get there, it's not easy. Because to Bob said it early, we talked about the left and the right. Hell, we had that in just some work locations, just one workspace. So when you are a leader, you have to take on the left and the right, but you have to just do that. And I think sometimes labor makes mistakes and do things like the easy way out, or we don't take on, you know, challenges. Well, we do it to the bosses, but not within our own structure. And so we have to do that in order to tear it down at its root and then continue to build and move forward. But we can't just go into it having this one lens on it, but within our own membership and workplaces, we got the left versus the right. And the only way to bring them together is education. So,
Jeff, we have 2 minutes remaining. So can you sum up some of these great questions?
Yeah, I'll resist the temptation to put more questions on the floor here, given we have 2 minutes left. But the follow-up really Nia just spoke to, because in Cedric's opening comments, one of the things he said is that the contested political terrain is not just external to the movement, it's within our own institutions and organizations. And I was going to ask Nia, which we just spoke to, that the story of the work that Unite HERE did in the 2020 election was also connected to the fact that the leadership within Unite here that took on that fight were Black women largely who said, we're going to organize this and we're going to drive this process. And so the relationship between the external contested terrain and the internal contested terrain is really critical. Rather than asking another question, it just seems to me that it's clear as we conclude, I want to give the panelists, Tammy, with your permission, like a moment to comment, but it just seems that part of the moment of reckoning that has been introduced is a reckoning around democracy itself, and the struggle for Black liberation has always been at the center of that fight. And so just a quick round, maybe Tammy, if the panelists want to have one last comment about this being a moment of reckoning around the fight for voting rights and democracy itself, what's the role that labor needs to play in that larger struggle? The lightning round.
An active and an eager role. So get mobilized, get our asses up, and be a labor movement. Labor has to be a labor movement and move. We can't be a movement without moving. We can't stand still. And I think sometimes we stand still. So let's be the labor movement and move into a more just society and allow ourselves to be the leaders of that, because we've been doing it, but we've only been doing it within our own membership. Let's continue to work with these not outside, but let's continue to work with our allies and other organizations, because we cannot do it alone. And let's get this done and get it done now, because we have to seize the moment. We can't allow this opportunity to pass by us. And if we do, then shame on us. And if we do, we need to think about that every day, that what we do not do will make a difference in the labor movement if there is one behind us. So we have to do it, and we have to do it now. And now is the time and the moment. And I'm thankful that I'm a part of this. Thank you.
Bob?
What she said.
Yeah. I was going to say what.
Follow women of color.
The only thing I would add is, I mean, this is a challenge, right? Because a union is not a political organization. People don't voluntarily join the union because they agree with us, agree with our politics. They join the union because either they organized into it, or most people join because they end up in a workplace where there's a union. And we have a very diverse membership, which is why I think political education becomes so important. And an understanding that we're not going to win over 100% of our members. I mean, our union has 30% hardcore Trumpers. They live in an information bubble, and we've found it almost impossible to break through. We've got to go with the coalition of the willing and build the kind of movement mentality that will make it possible to reinvigorate the labor movement. But we're going to have to be accountable to 100% of our members in the sense of we got to deliver for them day to day. So it's a real deep challenge, and I hope we're up to it.
I would just say, as this conversation suggests, that we are witnessing the rebirth of the labor movement. When was the last time you can remember when entire occupational categories of people mounted a statewide and citywide general strike? And in the case of Unite here, a multi-city, right, strike at the Marriott hotel chain. I have not in my lifetime seen that kind of militance, right? And so we need to capitalize on it. And I think that if we do, we're going to be a sight to see.
So with that last note, final note, I want to thank all of the panelists, Christine running our tech, and Jeff for joining us for, the passionate part of the presentation. We're running late. I'm so sorry. I want you to all get back to the plenary. There's a lot of great things going on for the rest of the program. Sorry to those in the chat for which we did not get to answer directly. And hopefully, though, these folks are in the movement. You can reach out to them individually and follow up these conversations. Thank you all so much for attending.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks
folks.
everyone. That was a great group of folks.
I thought so. I don't remember very many panels, like just in general in conferences, that were as good as that one. So congrats.
Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Christine.